Well, welcome everybody to the Beards and Bible podcast. My name is Josh. I am joined by my good friend Gabe, and here we are on Wednesday, November 6th, early in the afternoon, post-election day. Gabe, how you feeling today, man?
I'm feeling good. Feeling good. Got a good night's sleep. I did not permit myself to stay up too late watching all the shenanigans on TV, so I just went to bed.
Yeah.
And, woke up around 3 o'clock to relieve thyself.
And
And
you checked the phone, didn't you?
I checked my phone. It was on my bedside table. I looked at it. And I looked at it and saw that, Trump had more or less sealed the deal. He was the victor.
I was very tempted to do that. I stayed up till about 11:30, and then I just couldn't do it anymore.
Wow,
so
man.
I'd sleep. Yeah. Got up in the middle of the night to go pee, and I was like, should I check my phone? And then I thought, if I do, then I won't want to go back to sleep because I want to read more, you know? Didn't, and then got up at 6 this morning and saw the results. And it was,
self-control. Self-control.
I don't know about that. The older I get, the harder it is for me to stay up late. So last night was pushing it, and I'm paying a price for it today. So I think I can stay awake.
The older I get, the more I have to wake up in the middle of the night to relieve thyself. Isn't it weird that like you always remember hearing like older guys talking about, oh man, I got up 5 times to sometimes I wake up in the morning and I'm like, did I sleep at all? Like all I did was stumble into the bathroom over and over and over.
See, young guys that are like in their early 20s are going to be listening to this podcast and they're going to be like, what is wrong?
Yeah.
Listen, you get warned and you never believe the older guys, but I'm just saying it happens. Strange things happen the older you get, and that's one of them. So, Gabe, how did the results line up with the predictions and expectations we had going into this election? How was it different than what we were told about this election, or was it?
I think a lot of people were cautious, especially on the right this time around, to predict it in Trump's favor, because you remember in 2020 and then in 2022 with the midterm elections, everyone thought 2022 was going to be like this red wave with the midterm elections. Yeah. And they were just, a lot of people, like right-leaning commentators, were very wrong. So I think everybody's kind of go a little bit more cautiously moving forward with this one. Personally speaking, I did not really have any expectations. I actually, if anything, I thought Kamala Harris was going to win.
Really?
Okay. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Huh. So here's what, like, we've heard the past 6 months, though, from the media, and it's not, this was the closest U.S. election that we've had in our history. Did you hear that line?
I did not.
Yeah.
In terms of a popular vote?
Just in terms of everything. Yeah. I mean, they just said it was a complete toss-up, right?
Yeah, prior to the, I see what you're saying.
Prior to the night of, right? So they said
right.
It's a complete toss-up. It could be anybody's race. They're neck and neck in all these swing states. And I think as the results started rolling in, what I started finding myself believing, and maybe this isn't, maybe my view of the information that I was given is flawed, but what I found myself believing, and I'd love to hear if anybody's listening thinks this too, is that the narrative that the media gave me for 6 months was just pure propaganda that was completely divorced from reality.
Yeah.
Like, it was portrayed to me as the closest election in U.S. history, but it ended up being not really close at all.
Yeah. I mean, as we're recording this, I think Alaska, Nevada, Arizona, those 3, if not more, states are still yet to get their complete numbers in. And when they do, if they all, and they're all right now leaning towards Trump, when they do get their numbers in and they do go to Trump, I think this is like in landslide territory.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And this is the first Republican president who has won the popular vote since 2004. So in 20 years.
Wow.
So, yeah, I mean, it's not close. It was that wasn't true. We were told it was going to be the closest election in U.S. history. Going back on that now and looking at it and going, that's just, did they know all along that it was trending red, but they didn't want to say it? Because if they said it, then maybe that would give momentum to the Trump Vance ticket, and they didn't want to give momentum to the Trump Vance ticket, so they had to You know what I mean? So that's, I don't know if anybody else is feeling like that, but I think felt very much like, gosh, I've been lied to for 6 months.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I think if you didn't realize that during COVID, that
Yeah.
the corporate media was just absolute trash, then you definitely, I think that this election is the nail in the coffin for
Yeah.
corporate legacy media, and that we're seeing, yeah, absolutely, they are not as influential as they once were, and then people who did put their faith in them, and I'm talking like, your mainstream network channels, people are saying, wait a second, they really don't have a clue. They really don't
Yeah.
have any influence. Um, and I think you're going to see platforms that are primarily internet and independent platforms like Joe Rogan,
Hmm.
um, like Daily Wire, just all these different internet and independent platforms that will spring up, and they will be more influential. But there's a bad side of that, and the bad side of that is that those things are largely algorithmically driven in
Right.
terms of who they reach.
Hmm.
So you're going to have people who are like subscribing to this YouTube channel or this podcast based on what the algorithm thought they might want to hear. And then you're going to
Right.
have people on the complete opposite end of the spectrum doing the same thing. And I
Hmm.
think that could potentially further ideologically divide our nation over those lines.
Yeah, that is an interesting thought.
But at the same time, you're gonna get real, uh, like more on the ground information about what's going on.
Mhm.
Um, I'm not going to say unbiased because some of it's going to be biased, but you're going to get more real time information that is not swayed by large corporate donors like
Yeah.
pharmaceutical companies or whatever the case is.
Yeah, it definitely feels that the legacy mainstream media pooped the bed with this because they basically have proven themselves to be completely out of touch with how most people
Hmm.
feel, right? So the
Yeah.
media told us for months that, Donald Trump's rally at Madison Square Gardens was essentially a neo-Nazi white supremacist rally,
Hmm.
and that Donald Trump was going to, completely lose Hispanic, Latino voters because there was a joke told at the Madison Square Garden rally by a comedian, and that's going to swing the election. And Liz Cheney would swing the election, and Tim Waltz wearing camo hats and playing video games with AOC on Twitch. That was gonna, and and looking back on it now, it's like all of that was a complete distortion of reality
Hmm.
that wasn't even connected to how most people felt. And I think it seems like Americans are absolutely fed up
Hmm.
with these narratives they're being fed. They find it condescending and patronizing, and a lot
Hmm.
of people just feel like they're being lied to and gaslit.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think the predictions and expectations we had just, I mean, were, whether it was unintentional or whether it was definitely intentional, not
Hmm.
even close to what the reality of this election actually ended up being.
Yeah.
So voter turnout's another interesting one. We won't really know true voter turnout for probably a couple days
Yeah.
after they tally all the votes in. But what did it look like as we were watching it come in? Was it more than 2020, less than 2020?
Mm.
What'd you see?
Yeah, I think it was considerably more than 2020. I think we saw suburban and rural voters really turn up in mass. And whereas I think in 2020, we saw a lot of the urban and metropolitan areas of a particular state had a lot more influence over whether that state was going to lean left or right, Republican or Democrat. But I think in this election, we really saw, um, more suburban and rural voters really turn out to vote, which kind of prevented that metropolitan influence over the state as much. Does that make sense? So, like
Yeah.
Pennsylvania, for
Yeah.
instance,
Yep.
I was watching Pennsylvania last night. It's like you had, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, even parts of like Erie County coming in,
Hmm.
and they were just solid blue. And then later, the middle of the state started filling in.
Yep.
They were all solid red,
Right.
and then Pennsylvania flipped red, and it stayed red for the remainder of the counting. That didn't. I don't think that happened in 2020. I think that
Mm-mm.
those big metropolitan areas pretty much dictated the direction the state was going to go in. So I thought that was interesting.
So it kind of seems like, and we won't know for sure until all the votes get counted, but it kind of seems
Hmm.
like voter turnout in rural and suburban areas was really the
Mm-hmm.
difference maker in swing states.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so voters in these areas, it seems like, and these are just, we don't know, but it kind of seems like voters in these areas realized how much was at stake in this election, and they stepped up and made their voice heard.
Yeah. Yeah. Pennsylvania, just to confirm, Pennsylvania in 2020 did go to the Biden Harris campaign.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. As did Georgia, right?
mhm. Yeah, Georgia did too. 16
Yeah.
electoral college votes went to Biden Harris. So, yeah, this was like a absolutely game changing um, election in that way.
Yeah.
Another thing that I was reading an article this morning is black voters. So in the Harris carried, I was reading it. So Harris carried black voters 86% to Trump's 12%. And Latino voters, 53% went to Harris, whereas only 45 went to Trump. But in the 2020 election, Biden won black voters by a much wider margin, where 92% of black voters voted for Biden-Harris campaign, and only 8% of black voters voted for the Trump
Mm.
campaign. And Latinos were further divided as well, where 65% went to the Biden campaign and only 32 went to the Trump campaign. So in other words, this idea of minorities, which would include um, Latino Americans and Black Americans, pretty much towing the party line between Democrat and Republican, and always siding with the Democrats, seems to be splintering. This idea
Yeah.
that that along racial lines you can pretty much determine which direction people are voting. Now, that being said, it still seems like the majority of black voters are voting for the Democratic candidate, but not with as much, as wide a margins as they did in 2020, which
Right.
is really interesting to me.
Yeah. Two interesting trends also to note. I'm looking at these same demographics. The male and the female gap, so the gender gap.
Mm.
So 54% of men voted Trump. Uh, yeah, 54% of men voted Trump. 44% of men voted Harris.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the exact opposite with Harris. 54% of females voted Harris, and 44% of females voted Trump.
Mm.
So that's kind of interesting. It's basically flip flops with that. Um, it's interesting too. First time voters, Trump seemed to lead in first time voters.
Mm.
Um, and Democrats have historically done really, really well in the 18 to 29-year-old. They only, this election had 55% of votes from 18 to 29-year-old.
Mm.
So they lost some percentage points there. And then really the college educated vote was a big difference maker too. Among those who are not college educated, 54% of them voted for Trump. Those who are college educated, 57% of them voted for Harris.
Mm.
So that's an interesting trend. And some might even look at that trend and say that working class people don't have the luxury of kind of being distanced from policy decisions about the economy enough to where they can kind of just sit back and just sort of pontificate about what they think
Mm-hmm.
the right solution could be. Because if you're working class, you're not college educated, like what you're most concerned about is your grocery bill going up,
Mm-hmm.
is the housing market, immigration. Like those are the issues that really affect you.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're college educated, you tend to be a little bit more removed from those
Mm-hmm.
issues.
Sure.
And so you may tend to lean more left in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
That's just a theory. I
Yeah,
don't
you're probably thinking more about like social issues
exactly. Yeah.
than survival issues.
Yeah. So speaking of which, what are some of the key issues? I mean, we've identified a bunch of issues so far. I mean, was we talked through stuff in the debates, but at the end of the day, what were the issues that really made or broke this election?
Mm. Well, I think Harris just did not succeed in completely detaching herself from the Biden administration.
Yeah.
And in doing so, she was unable to detach herself from the economic woes that are now associated with the Biden administration. Um, So in other words, economy was a big one.
Hmm.
I mean, I go to the grocery
Seems to
store
be
and
the biggest.
I bemoan the cost of a dozen eggs. I have four
Oh
sons, and I'm
yeah,
like, dear Lord, I have to pay how much for a dozen eggs or a gallon of milk or
yeah,
whatever. And it's like, man, and I feel that every single time I go to the grocery store.
sure.
And um, housing market, same thing. It's like most Americans and the millennial Gen Z generations, they feel like the housing market is just it's an American dream that only the boomers could have ever had, like, and owned a home.
Hmm.
So I think the economy, but I also think second to that would probably be just the state of our republic, and looking at the Biden Harris administration, and wondering, is this heading in the direction that I want it to head in? Um, and that, I think, spans a lot of different generations in the United States of America. I mean, we were looking at um, American tax dollars going to pay for things like transgender surgeries for prisoners or inmates.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
Tax dollars going to pay for transgender surgeries for illegal immigrants waiting in detention centers,
yeah,
stuff like that. And we were getting wind of these things and thinking, this is lunacy.
yeah.
I've got to pay $6 for a gallon of milk and $4 for a dozen eggs or whatever it is. It's like, and my hard earned money is going to pay so that these inmates can get a surgery, an elective surgery to transition to a different gender.
Yeah.
Like, this is just absolute lunacy. And so I think we started to think, like, wait, this is like racing towards the cliff that I don't want to go over.
You know, it's
So I think
interesting. Yeah, keep going. Sorry.
No, I think that a lot of Americans just weighed the cost on that, and they were like, put those two things
Yeah,
together, the economy and like the direction, culturally speaking, that this administration was taking it or allowing us to go in.
right.
And they were like, wait, we want to pump the brakes on this.
Yeah, no, I was going to add to that. I think that's a huge, 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 huge issue that the Democrats totally missed, and it's that these culture war issues. I think the Democratic Party kept pushing further and further and further and further,
Mm-hmm.
just assuming that anybody that fit in a certain category, if you're female, if you're black, if you're college educated, then you're going to agree with us, you know, right down the middle. And I think they completely misread how people actually felt about issues related to, trans men playing women's sports,
Mm-hmm.
or I mean stuff like that. I heard this on Morning Joe on MSNBC. I just turned on MSNBC this morning just because I thought it'd be hilarious just to see how people are talking about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Uh, the most liberal news network in the U.S., by the way, if you don't know. And there was a guy on MSNBC, a hardline Democrat, basically looking at his Democratic co-host and saying, "We missed it. Our party is completely out of touch
Mm-hmm.
with where most Americans are on these social and cultural issues." And he pointed out, and this
Mm-hmm.
I have to look this up and read more about it, but he said that exit polls showed that 85% of Americans
Mm-hmm.
disagreed with the Democratic Party's stance on trans males and women's sports.
Wow.
So 85% of Americans basically look at the Democratic Party on this issue and go, "You guys are nuts. You guys are
Mm-hmm.
crazy. We don't agree
Mm-hmm.
with you." But the Democratic Party just assumed, hey, if you fall into a certain identity, if you're college educated, if you're female, if you're black, if you're Latino, if you're, whatever, you're going to agree with us on this issue, this issue, this issue, this issue. And there was no nuance there. It was just, our entire ticket or none of it. And so, yeah, I think that social issues played a huge, huge part of it. What about abortion? Do you think the issues of abortion and pro-choice, pro-life, if that played as much as maybe we were told that it would play?
No, I don't think it did. I think I think that the left wanted us to believe that abortion, and I'm doing air quotes, or women's rights,
Yeah, women's
autonomous,
reproductive health,
yeah,
quote unquote.
women's reproductive right was a big deal. But I don't think a lot of people turned up to vote on that particular issue.
No.
Um, what's interesting, though, going back to Pennsylvania, I was watching this guy, uh, forget his name, Nick Anderson or something, on YouTube. He just goes around and asks people random questions, like about politics and stuff. He went to Pennsylvania, with Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, which is like the most highly uh, highest Amish population per capita than anywhere else in the world. and he's going around asking these Amish people who traditionally never vote.
Yeah.
They're like coming out in historical numbers to vote in this election. And he's like, why? Why are you doing this? And who are you voting for? They're all unanimously saying Donald Trump. But it's interesting
Wow.
because some of those counties flipped red. And I think because of the tens of thousands of Amish going to vote for the first time, some of them first time in their lives, because of some of the policies that the Biden-Harris administration were pushing on the Amish farmers about farming, about raising animals, about eating your own animals, about self-sufficiency. And they were realizing, wait a second, our way of life is going to be uh, legislated away basically with this administration. We have to
Wow.
do something about this.
Yeah.
And they did. And I wonder how much of an effect that had. But I think just examples like that, like there were just people groups and cultures and subcultures of people who saying, wait a second, my values and my way of life are really kind of on the ballot with this particular election. And
Yeah.
I need to do something about it.
There was one key issue. I was watching the news network. I can't remember which one it was. They were asking people what issues played the biggest role in deciding your vote. Number one was economy.
Mm-hmm.
I think number two was immigration. Uh,
Mm.
Number three was democracy, or like
Mm.
the
Mm-hmm.
existential threat to democracy, which I think is super interesting because the way that I interpret that is that many people who cast a vote for Harris were simply voting out of that fear narrative that was given to them, that you have to vote for
Mm-hmm.
Harris because if you don't vote for Harris, I think it was Oprah Winfrey that said, if you don't vote for Harris, this may be the last election you'll ever see in the United States of America.
Mm. Wow.
And so that's such an interesting, in the end, it was an inconsequential issue because it didn't work. But I thought that was fascinating that ended up being one of the top issues that exit polls showed people actually voted on.
Yeah.
That Trump was an existential threat to democracy. But
Mm.
um, what about like the younger generation? What role do you think they played in this election? I think in the
Mm.
past, like in 2008, it was very, very, very obvious that Barack Obama carried the younger generation by a
Mm-hmm.
landslide.
Yeah.
You hardly met anybody. I mean, you did have some people that were McCain voters in 2008, but most people
Mm-hmm.
were that were under the age of 30 were all about Barack Obama, right? Change you can believe in, yes we can, all that stuff. Did we see that divide in this election, or was it a little bit more nuanced?
I don't know. I haven't seen the numbers on that, but what I think the Biden administration did one thing really well. Actually, let's two things. Barron Trump strongly encouraged his dad, Donald Trump, and his vice president, his running mate, J.D. Vance, to go on one of the most influential talk shows and podcasts that is Joe Rogan, just
Yes.
a week or two before the election. And just the Joe Rogan and Donald Trump interview on YouTube alone, I just looked at it, has 46 million views.
Sheesh.
It's 3 hours long.
Yeah.
And then JD Vance, same thing. It's like 3 hours of just them sitting there talking and having a conversation. And the same invitation was offered to the Harris ticket, but they didn't accept it. They didn't do it.
Right. Right. Right.
And
Right.
at first, Donald Trump didn't want to really, that was out there. He didn't really think that that was worth his while. But Barron, being younger, was like, "Wait a second, I think you need to do this because this is going to be big. This is going to be influential." And I think
Yeah.
him doing that at the 11th hour and then getting an endorsement from Joe Rogan was, I don't know how influential that was in swaying the younger vote, but I know that it had to have been pretty influential. The second thing, I think a lot of millennial and Gen Zs really liked RFK,
Yes.
and a lot of RFK's ideologies resonated with us. When RFK dropped out and then sided with Trump, and then became kind of a champion of like let's make America healthy again. Let's question like what's in our food and some of these big, you know, health incentives, getting fluoride out of like municipal water, all this other stuff.
Right,
I
right,
think
right.
the younger generation was like, those who liked RFK were like, dude, that's awesome.
Yeah,
Now suddenly the Republican ticket is the ticket of health and fitness and um, questioning what's in our food and
right.
thinking about all these other and it's like that was usually because usually the Republican Party is usually the one that's like fried chicken and sweet tea, right? It's like
Right, right, right.
big corporations and um now it's almost flipped in a way, or
Yeah.
it has completely flipped.
Well, I was looking at some exit poll demographics. So 18 to 29-year-olds, 55% of them voted for Harris, 42% of them voted for Trump. However, in 2020, 61% of 18 to 29-year-olds voted for Biden.
Hmm.
So she lost about 6% of the 18 to 29-year-old vote.
Hmm.
And I mean, one could
Interesting.
look at the decision for Trump to go on Joe Rogan, and
Hmm.
he got like interviewed by Theo Vaughn, I think.
Yeah, Theo
I
Vaughn.
mean, he's got like all these, alternative comedians that, are all down with him. And, Tony Hinchcliffe for, all of the, you know, that joke backfired. I mean, Tony Hinchcliffe is a pretty influential YouTube comedian
Hmm.
that Trump got to show up at his, Madison Square Garden rally. So I really do think those 6 percentage points for young voters or new voters, I think that did play a part in the
Hmm.
election.
Hmm.
Um, one of the most interesting things, though, to look at is the difference between young men's votes and young women's votes,
Hmm.
and just how young men overwhelmingly sided with Trump, um, versus how young women voted. And I think even the messaging leading up to election day, I don't think the Harris camp even tried towards the last part. I mean, you saw some of their attempts to try to appeal to male voters, and it was just downright laughable. Like
Hmm. Yeah.
Tim Waltz playing video games with AOC on Twitch, or him wearing a camo hat, or them talking about, um, the fact that they're gun owners. Did you see that really cringy
Hmm.
commercial about the guy from Alabama who was a who was a Harris voter? Did you see that?
No. Oh, I did see that.
Man, I'll see if I can find it on YouTube and look at it. It is absolutely cringy. It's like him with like a trucker hat and boots, and he's got his Red Wing boots on. He's driving a truck, and he's like, "I'm a Harris voter from Alabama, and I can't vote for Trump this year." Blah blah blah. And they're trying to make him seem as like manly as possible. And pretty
Hmm.
much any dude that I know who has seen that is just like, "This is so stupid. This is just pandering." And I think young men probably saw past that and saw through that.
That's funny. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, any dollar amount you spend on trying to sway Alabama politics for the Democratic Party is just an absolute waste of your money. Like I was watching one of the networks last night, and they like 1% of the Alabama vote was in, and they called it for Trump. It was like,
No,
dude,
gosh, yeah,
they don't
yeah,
even they don't even give us the time of day. They're just like,
yeah,
whatever,
yeah,
1% call it for Trump. It's fine.
yeah. That's hilarious.
Yeah.
So how do you think just the overall tone of this election has impacted the political landscape and even our public trust in both the electoral process, and then even like we talked about the media, like what we're being
Mm,
told about the electoral process?
man. Well, I was relieved to see that there weren't a lot of fingers being pointed about cheating and just kind of this overall like promotion of mistrust in the voting process. It seemed like compared to 2020, there was a lot. Everything was way more on the up and up in this one.
Yeah.
Um, that's a relief because you cannot hold a democracy or republic together without the bedrock of trust in the election process. Um, but yeah, other than that, I mean, this was a pretty wild cycle. We had two failed assassination attempts on the same candidate. Um, and I think some of that is due to yeah, like the divisive rhetoric that's going on in the political realm that is basically saying each party is saying to each other, "You're going to be the end of our country if you get elected." But then also,
Mm,
I think there may have been some foreign players involved with at least one of them that
mm.
had an interest in seeing Trump killed. Um, but yeah, it's pretty very incendiary, a tense election cycle for sure.
Yeah, what do you mean by foreign parties involved trying to see Trump killed? I haven't heard
I
about that.
think yeah. So I think this Thomas Crooks guy.
Hmm.
Um, I think there's going to be some stuff that's going to come to light. And I'm completely speculating here, but I think,
Okay.
um, I mean, they like had his apartment like professionally scrubbed by the time the FBI or Secret Service showed up. Like there is not a trace of information about this dude and his motives.
Hmm.
Um, and then the other one was like the other guy who did get arrested. He was like, "Hey, I'm going to give you $150,000 if you can effectively kill the president, or if you can kill Donald Trump." And
Sheesh.
did you see that in his little letter that he left?
No, I did not. Huh.
Yeah, yeah. So like so in other words, like you gotta believe that the leaders of the world are looking at this election. All eyes are on this, thinking, how can I somehow influence this in one way or the other?
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
yeah, I think I I would bet that there's going to be some stuff that comes to light with this Thomas Crooks guy that is going to be really interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe some
Hmm.
foreign influence that we didn't know about.
It's the Canadians.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm just to all of our Canadian listeners. I'm just joking. I
yeah.
promise. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think overall the tone of this election was um kind of dark,
Hmm.
pretty stark in contrast to the messaging that you heard, 14 years ago,
Hmm.
the Obama campaign. Yes, we can change. You can believe in. Um, that was a message of a lot of hope coming out of the George W. Bush second term, where his approval rating was low, and but I feel like John McCain also ran kind of on a platform of hope,
Hmm.
trying to move the nation forward. And in 14 years, man, it just seems like that
Hmm.
messaging has just completely changed. It,
Yeah,
it was very much, you know, if that other person wins, you can say goodbye to this nation as we know it.
yeah.
And I think
Which
both
is,
candidates had that tone.
and I think they realized that really resonates with angry Americans.
Yeah.
And that's why RFK did not get as much traction as he had hoped because he refused to make personal attacks and smear his opponents. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, he did say things that he didn't like about them, but he didn't personally smear them or say that they're going to be the end of the democracy if they get elected. But I think Americans, I and I think I don't know why, but it seems like the general consensus um, is that Americans are really spooled up emotionally right
Yeah.
now, and um, we really fear for our way of life coming to an end, and we always think that that guy or that girl is going to bring the usher in that end for our way of life.
Hmm.
So, yeah, yeah,
That
pretty
may be
tense.
a lot older of a political tactic than we think.
Hmm.
I'd be interested to go back 100 years and see what
Yeah.
elections, what campaigns were running on back 100 years ago.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
because maybe that's just kind of the oldest trick in the book is to say to people, uh, your way of life is going to come to an end. This nation is going to come to an end. You have to vote for me to basically save America, and that was the message that both of these candidates were running on. Trump's big thing was Kamala broke it, I'll fix it. And if she gets in again, she's going to continue just to fix it to a place that's irreparable. And then her big thing was he's a fascist.
Hmm.
And, you know, like what she said with Oprah, if he gets elected, this is the last election we'll ever have, which is crazy.
Hmm.
That is nuts to make that assessment, right? Um, yeah, in terms of public trust of the media, I think the tone of this election I think public trust in the legacy and mainstream media is at an all-time low. I don't think it's
Mm.
ever been lower.
Yeah.
And I think that there is probably going to be a either massive upheaval in legacy and mainstream media, or you're just going to start to see it fading off into irrelevancy
Mm-hmm.
because people are just tired of being gaslit and lied to and fed
Mm.
propaganda. And journalists have started acting more like activists than journalists, and people are just tired of that.
Yeah.
So, so Donald Trump will assume office in January of 2025. What challenges do you think he's going to face from day one based on the state of our country?
Wow. Yeah. So he's going into office with, what do we call it? A super majority,
Yeah,
where
he'll
he
have
has
the
the
Senate.
House. Yeah.
He'll probably have the House.
He'll have the
We don't know
House, the
yet, but he
Senate, and he'll
probably
have
will.
a predominantly, overwhelmingly conservative Supreme Court.
Yes, that's
Um,
that's remarkable. I can't remember last time that's happened.
yeah. Yeah. That is pretty crazy. Um, yeah. I think he's going to face some challenges, but I think he's basically got a blank check to overcome those challenges if he wants to. Um,
Hmm.
there's not a lot going to be standing in his way. Now, I hope that he doesn't just sign a bunch of executive orders, but rather
Right.
does everything through the legal means um, of legislation and everything. But yeah, I mean, he's got a war in the Middle East. He's got a war in Russia and Ukraine. He's got
Hmm.
a rise of um, Iranian power and saber rattling going on. He's got North Korea. Just that's just like
Right.
foreign policy issues that are
And
going
here
on.
at
Then he's
home,
got
he's got the
yeah,
economy. He's got inflation.
hmm
We're on the brink of recession.
yeah. I think he's going to have about 6 months to prove
Yeah.
to Americans that he's kind of righting the ship. Um,
Hmm.
maybe a year.
Yeah.
So by the time of his first State of the Union, he's got to have some real numbers to prove that he's kind of turned this thing around.
Well, what's interesting is his first term, he did not have a majority in
Hmm.
the House, I believe.
Hmm.
I can't remember if he didn't have a majority in the Senate, but almost immediately, as soon as he got in office, there were talks about him getting impeached.
Hmm.
So his first term, he was having to overcome basically, every decision he wanted to make, he was opposed by the legislative branch of our government, uh, and also a lot of the appointments he wanted to make on his cabinet, those got opposed and couldn't get confirmed because he had the legislative branch trying to block a lot of stuff that he was doing. So it's going to be a completely different ballgame in January coming in from day one. You may not have to see as many executive orders because he may not need to use the executive branch like he has in the past. Maybe he could, you know, do what he needs to do through the House and Senate because they're on board with him.
Hmm.
Um,
I mean, he's technically a convicted felon.
that's true.
I mean, that's a challenge he's going to have to navigate. Although um, the Justice Department is part of the executive branch, um, so he's got that going for him. That basically, I don't know. Like this is completely new territory as a United
Yeah,
States of America has had to navigate. That we have a sitting or a president elect who is a convicted felon who might possibly have the means to pardon himself. Like
yeah, that
I
is
don't even
interesting.
know. I don't think
Well,
anybody really knows how this is all going to play
I
out.
think I think when the Supreme Court ruled a few months ago, they ruled that essentially the office holder of the executive branch has some exemption
Hmm.
in terms of being charged. And so that may be held up.
Yeah.
I think another thing that could happen is he might have the power to basically fire a bunch of federal judges and appoint new judges.
Hmm.
I don't know how exactly that works. So if somebody listening knows a little
Yeah.
bit more than I do in that, I mean that would be an interesting thing to think through.
Some people are saying that this a new attorney general that he appoints would have the ability to dismiss the charges against him.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
There you go. So it kind of seems like there might be just as many people that are Trump haters, but for the most part, it's going to be like a yipping dog trying to slow down a freight train, right?
Yeah. I mean, like there was the charges brought against him in Georgia for trying to overturn the 2020 election um, with the DA Fannie Willis, and
Fanny.
yeah,
Who names
but
your kid Fanny?
turns out like that's taken a weird twist because it turns out little Fanny has been showing her fanny to the key prosecutor on the case. So like, I mean, it's just bizarre, man.
Fanny shows her fanny.
Yeah, like it's just bizarre stuff like that. It's
Yeah.
it's definitely been a historic election cycle. Very
Yes, it
historic,
has.
and it will continue to be.
Are you kind of relieved that it's over? Or is there a part of you that like you're gonna miss just the drama of it? I mean, where are you at with this?
No, I will not miss the drama at all. I'm relieved that it's over. Yeah, it was like, you know, when you so one time I was driving home from work and the sun was in my eyes. I was coming up a hill and my windshield was really dirty. I couldn't see the fact that on the other side of the road there was a school bus that had stopped.
Oh, sheesh.
It was like a 4-lane road, but technically, legally, I should have stopped. And I blew by this, you know, stopped school bus. One little kid got off and walked right up to his front door. But anyways, I broke the law. And I realized it after the fact. I could see in my mirror that I just passed a school bus. So it was like this, like, this like anxiety day after day after day, knowing that that thing probably took a picture of my license plate. They're probably going to mail me a ticket in the mail. And it's going to be exorbitant. And so just like, when is this, when is this coming? When is this coming? Just get it over with, get it over with. And finally it came, finally it arrived. It was $300. I paid it and moved on with my life. And that's kind of how it feels. Kind of like, okay, we're there, Yep. Yes. The guy I kind of wanted to win more than the opponent has won. So I have that sense of relief as well. But also, I'm just glad that it's all over. It's kind of a, some of the hardest steel is forged in the fires of a dumpster, and that's what it felt like in this selection cycle.
Of a dumpster.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. Yesterday was a really weird day for me. Like, I just kind of, I don't know if you felt this, just that like. Anxiety was kind of a word, but not. I don't even know what it was. I mean, it wasn't like a. I don't know how I was feeling. I mean, it was just a really odd day because it was kind of like I could wake up tomorrow in America, in an America that looks completely different than the one I'm living in today.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think all day yesterday, like I spent the day really spent a lot of time in prayer, just trying to ask the Lord, God, whatever happens, could you just make it to where our nation can be united from this division and where your people can, keep a sober mind.
Yeah.
In the face of it, So it's kind of like I was telling somebody earlier today, I spent so much time and so much energy just binging on so much information.
Mm-hmm.
Because here on this podcast, we've been kind of covering this since probably July. After the first assassination attempt. I mean, we did episodes on the assassination attempt, on the debate. And so, we've been following it pretty closely. I've been following it pretty closely, probably closer than most elections, I think, in modern history. So there's a part of me that's like relieved that it's over. Like you were saying, like, it's kind of like, okay, so the other shoe dropped and it's not as bad as I thought it would be. I don't know. Then there's the other part that I just go, okay, it's now going to, like, I'm naive to think that all the culture wars have gone away just because a president got in office that is, won the popular vote and most people wanted to see him get in. Like, for me to think that all the unity that we need is just going to happen in the first 100 days of a Trump presidency, that's extremely naive. Like, that's not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But kind of as we land the plane, what do you think as a believer? Like, is there any verse that comes to mind when you find yourself thinking and praying about this? Like, what comes to mind, and what can we do as believers to work towards being people who unify
Hmm. Yeah.
and being people who, I don't know, help heal some of the division that we're finding ourselves in?
Yeah. I think it's important for believers, especially, to be, I think you put it very succinctly, stay sober minded in this time. And, Second Peter, I'm sorry, First Peter 2:11, he says, I urge you as sojourners and as exiles to abstain from the passions of the flesh, which would include, anger, which would include um, gloating over your guy winning the election, which would include, you know, anxiety over who's going to win or whether this is going to fix all of our problems. He says those things wage against your soul. And I think it's really important to know that and understand and remember that the health of the body of Messiah in the United States of America is not dictated and determined by who wins a presidential election.
Yeah.
We still need repentance and a revival in the United States of America just as much today as we did yesterday.
Yes.
Who is our president elect does not change that whatsoever.
Yeah.
So
That's a good
that's
word.
kind of the message I would like to send to all of believers in the United States of America, is that Donald J. Trump and J.D. Vance are not our savior. The risen Christ is our savior. And yes, they may do some things that are of benefit to our economy or to our nation. They may not, but God is sovereign, and we still need to remember that these men are fallen human beings who will fail us in some way
Yeah.
or another.
Absolutely. I go to Titus 3, where Paul is telling Titus, his protege, who's trying to lead the churches in Crete. He says, remind them to submit to rulers and authorities, to obey, to be ready for every good work, to slander no one, to avoid fighting, to be kind, always showing gentleness to all people. And then he
Mm.
talks about who they were before they came to Christ, and then how Christ saved them. And then after saying all that, this is what he says, and this is Titus 3, verse 8. He says, this saying is trustworthy. I want you to insist on these things so that those who have believed God might be careful to devote themselves to good works. These are good and profitable for everyone. But avoid foolish debates, genealogies, quarrels, and disputes about the law, because they're unprofitable and worthless. Reject
Mm.
a divisive person after a first and second warning, for you know that such a person has gone astray and is sinning. He's self-condemned. So I think the message that I would send to believers listening to this is, um, you need to reject unprofitable and worthless uh, debates.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, the person who won, that's the person who God in his sovereignty, for whatever reason, wants to be in office. And what we're called to is to devote ourselves to doing good works and to living out our faith, to avoid fighting, to be kind, showing gentleness to all people, even those we disagree with. And we're warned that divisiveness is like a sin, right? So being divisive, looking for a fight, gloating in the tears of those that we disagree with, that's not Christ-like or kind.
Mm.
And so I think feeling a sense of relief or celebration if the election turned out the way we wanted it to, that's what's one thing altogether. But I think maybe celebrating and rejoicing in the fact that some people are sad or nervous or scared because of the result of the election, I don't think that's being kind or gentle or
Mm-hmm.
understanding. And that
Yeah.
probably leads to more divisiveness than it does healing. So
So you're saying I should take down my 12-foot Trump one flag in my front yard?
I think you should leave it up. I think you should leave it up because it is one of the greatest flags you've ever
Mm.
seen. Everybody's talking about it. We've never seen anything like it
It's
before.
huge, huge flag.
It's huge.
Beautiful.
Dude, I just am happy that I get to impersonate Trump for another 4 years,
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and I can drive people crazy. I was playing golf with somebody the other day, and the entire second half of our golf game, I just kept talking, this is going to be the greatest drive you have ever seen. This is a par 5. By the time I'm done with it, it's going to feel like a par 3. And then I triple bogeyed. But I did so in style. So, yeah.
So what do you got going on the rest of the day? You can
Man,
some pasturing.
This lunch break is coming to an end, and as it does, then I'm going to get back at it and try to drink a cup of coffee to stay awake. And then meeting with some folks and working on some budget stuff to end the year, and doing pastoring stuff. So
good times.
How about you?
Yeah, I think I'm getting back to work, and it's been raining pretty hard here, but I think it's cleared up, so we're gonna go back to work and see what's going on in the neighborhood down south here, and snoop around a little bit.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, thank you everybody for listening. Thank you for your kind and understanding and always insightful commentary as we have navigated these last 6 months of the U.S. presidential election. And now that it's over, you let us know. Do you want us to talk more about this stuff, or do you want us to stick to other things? Send us an email or leave us a YouTube comment. Our email address is beardsandbiblepodcast@gmail.com, and we will see you guys next time.